Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the universe changed forever. He sat in the command chair of the UES Defiance, watching Jupiter's red spot swirl through the main viewer. The patrol had been routine, just another week checking the outer system for pirates or smugglers. Nothing exciting ever happened out here. The communication officer turned around with wide eyes. "Captain, we're getting a transmission from outside the solar system. It's not human." Morrison set down his coffee cup carefully. In all his years commanding the Defiance, they had never received an alien signal. Earth had been searching for other life for centuries, but finding it was different from having it find you first. "Put it through," Morrison said. The main screen flickered and showed 3 figures. One looked like a walking crystal formation that sparkled with inner light. Another appeared to be some kind of aquatic creature in a water-filled suit. The third was humanoid but covered in what looked like metal scales. The crystal being spoke first, its voice somehow translating into perfect English. "Greetings, Earth vessel. I am Ambassador Velthar of the Galactic Coalition Council. We require immediate communication with your planetary leadership regarding a matter of extreme urgency." Morrison felt his heart rate spike. First contact with aliens, and they wanted to talk to Earth's government right away. This couldn't be good news. "I'm Captain Morrison of the United Earthship Defiance. I can relay your message to Terra Command immediately." The aquatic alien moved forward in its water suit. "Captain Morrison, your species has been observed and evaluated. The Coalition has determined that Earth meets the minimum requirements for membership in our organization. However, membership comes with responsibilities." The scaled humanoid stepped closer to the camera. "The galaxy is at war, Captain. An enemy known as the Void Syndicate threatens all civilized life. Every Coalition member must contribute military forces to the common defense or face expulsion from galactic society." Morrison's mouth went dry. Earth had just learned it wasn't alone in the universe, and now aliens were asking them to join a war. He managed to keep his voice steady. "I'll contact my superiors immediately. How long do we have to respond?" 72 of your hours," Ambassador Velthar replied. "A Coalition delegation will arrive at your home world to discuss the details. We hope humanity will make the right choice." The transmission ended, leaving Morrison staring at a blank screen. He turned to his communications officer. "Get me Admiral Brooks at Terra Command. Priority Alpha clearance." The next 3 days passed in a blur of emergency meetings and frantic preparations. Admiral Lisa Brooks assembled Earth's top military leaders and scientists at Terra Command headquarters. The Coalition delegation arrived as promised, their sleek silver ship dwarfing the space station. Morrison attended the meetings via video link from the Defiance. He watched as the alien representatives explained the situation to Earth's leaders. The Void Syndicate had been expanding across the galaxy for over a decade, consuming entire star systems and enslaving or destroying all life they encountered. "Show them the tactical displays," Ambassador Velthar said to his aide. Holographic images filled the conference room, showing massive fleets of dark ships arranged in perfect formations. The Syndicate vessels looked like they had been carved from black stone, with no visible windows or external features except for weapon ports that glowed with purple energy. "The enemy commands over 2,000 warships," the aquatic delegate explained. "Each vessel is equipped with dark matter cannons, quantum disruptors, and adaptive shielding technology. They have already destroyed 17 Coalition member worlds." Admiral Brooks leaned forward in her chair. "What kind of military contribution are you expecting from Earth?" The scaled alien consulted a datapad. "Standard Coalition protocol requires each member species to provide a minimum of 50 combat vessels for the combined fleet. We understand that newer civilizations may need time to build up their forces, but some immediate contribution is required." Brooks exchanged glances with the other Earth officials. Morrison could see the problem immediately through the video feed. Earth's entire space navy consisted of 12 ships, and most of those were exploration vessels with basic defensive weapons. "Admiral," Morrison said from the screen, "the Defiance is our most advanced combat ship. If Earth is going to contribute to this war, I volunteer my vessel and crew." The alien delegates looked at each other with what Morrison interpreted as disappointment. Ambassador Velthar spoke carefully. "Captain Morrison, we appreciate your courage. However, one ship is a very small contribution to a war of this magnitude." "It's what we have," Brooks replied firmly. Earth's space program has focused on exploration and scientific research, not military conquest. The Defiance represents our best current military technology. The Coalition representatives spent several minutes discussing something in their own languages. Finally, Ambassador Velthar turned back to the humans. Very well. We will accept the Defiance as Earth's contribution to the war effort. Your ship will join the Coalition fleet at Vega Station in 1 week. After the aliens left, Morrison remained on the video call with Admiral Brooks and the other officials. The mood in the room was grim. Jake, Brooks said, I need to be honest with you. The Coalition clearly doesn't think much of our military capabilities. You'll be flying into a war zone with technology that's probably decades behind the enemy. Morrison nodded. I understand, Admiral. But if this Void Syndicate is as dangerous as they claim, somebody has to stand against them. Earth might be new to galactic politics, but we've never backed down from a fight when innocent lives were at stake. The week that followed was intense preparation. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hayes worked with the engineering teams to optimize every system on the Defiance. Chief Engineer Patricia Wells supervised the loading of ammunition and supplies. Unlike the energy weapons that seemed standard among alien civilizations, the Defiance carried railguns, nuclear missiles, and kinetic penetrator rounds designed to punch through armor using pure velocity and mass. Morrison studied everything. Earth's intelligence services could gather about the Void Syndicate and Coalition military tactics. The information was limited, but certain patterns emerged. The aliens seemed to prefer long-range energy weapon duels, with fleets maneuvering in complex formations while trading plasma beams and particle cannon fire. On the day of departure, Morrison addressed his crew of 120 officers and enlisted personnel. They gathered in the main hangar bay looking nervous but determined. I won't lie to you, Morrison said. We're heading into a war that's been going on for years, fighting an enemy that has better technology and more ships than we can imagine. The other Coalition species probably see us as primitive newcomers who can't possibly make a difference. He paused, looking at the faces of men and women who had volunteered to follow him into the unknown. But they don't know humans the way we know ourselves. They don't understand that we've always found ways to win against superior odds. They don't know that when humans are backed into a corner, we don't give up. We get creative. The crew responded with determined expressions and quiet nods. Morrison smiled. The aliens sent one ship to represent Earth in this war. Let's make sure they remember why that was enough. The Coalition fleet at Vega Station was the most magnificent sight Jake Morrison had ever witnessed. 800 ships from dozens of different species hung in space like a collection of deadly jewels. Some vessels stretched for kilometers, their hulls gleaming with exotic metals and energy fields. Others moved like living creatures, their organic curves suggesting they had been grown rather than built. The Defiance looked pitiful by comparison. Morrison's ship was barely 300 meters long, its gray hull marked with Earth's simple blue and white insignia. As they approached the station, Morrison could see alien crews through transparent sections of nearby vessels, all of them staring at the primitive human ship with obvious curiosity. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hayes said from the navigation station, we're receiving docking instructions from Fleet Command. They're assigning us to Section 7, Subsection 12. Morrison checked the fleet disposition on his tactical screen. Section 7 was at the very back of the formation, far from the command ships and heavy cruisers. They were being placed with the supply vessels and medical ships. Understood, Morrison replied. Take us in nice and easy. Let's not give anyone a reason to think we can't handle basic maneuvers. The docking procedure went smoothly, though Morrison noticed that several alien ships moved away from their assigned berth as they approached. Whether this was standard protocol or a sign of distrust, he couldn't tell. Within an hour of docking, Morrison received orders to report to the flagship for a mission briefing. The Coalition command vessel was a massive Xerian crystal ship that seemed to bend light around its faceted surface. Morrison had never seen anything so beautiful or intimidating. The briefing room was filled with alien officers from at least 20 different species. Morrison recognized a few from the first contact meeting, but most were completely unfamiliar. Some breathed different atmospheres and attended the meeting through environmental suits or holographic projection. Fleet Admiral Keth Moore, a tall Xerian whose crystal body pulsed with blue energy, stood at the center of the room. His voice resonated with harmonic overtones that the translation system rendered into crisp English. Officers of the Coalition fleet, Admiral Kethmore began. "Our destination is the Sigma Draconis system. Intelligence reports indicate that Void Syndicate forces have established a forward base there, threatening shipping lanes to the inner colonies." A holographic display showed the target system, with its 3 planets and asteroid belt. Red markers indicated known enemy positions. Syndicate strength is estimated at 400 vessels, including at least 6 Dreadnought-class ships. "Our fleet will jump to the system in 3 hours and engage immediately." "Standard battle formation applies," Morrison raised his hand. Several alien officers turned to look at him with expressions he couldn't read. "Yes, Captain Morrison," Admiral Kethmore said with what sounded like patience. "Sir, what are my orders? Where does the Defiance fit into the battle plan?" The Admiral's crystal form shifted colors slightly. "Captain Morrison, your vessel will remain with the rear guard. Your primary mission is to assist with search and rescue operations after the engagement." Morrison felt his jaw tighten. They were being sidelined before the battle even began. "Admiral, with respect, my crew came here to fight. We may not have the biggest ship, but we're ready to do our part." "Captain," Admiral Kethmore replied, his harmonic voice carrying a note of condescension. "Your courage is noted. However, modern space combat requires weapons and defense systems that your vessel simply does not possess. The Syndicate's technology is far beyond anything your species has encountered. It would be irresponsible to place you in the primary battle line." Morrison wanted to argue further, but he recognized the futility. The other alien officers were already turning their attention back to the tactical displays. To them, the human ship was a token gesture barely worth considering in their planning. The jump to Sigma Draconis took place exactly on schedule. Morrison watched from the Defiance's bridge as space twisted around them, the strange sensation of faster-than-light travel making his stomach lurch. When the distortion cleared, they were in a new star system with an enemy fleet waiting for them. The Void Syndicate ships were exactly as terrifying as the intelligence reports had suggested. 400 vessels of dark metal hung in perfect geometric formation, their hulls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. The largest ships were kilometer-long dreadnoughts that bristled with weapon ports glowing with purple energy. "All ships, this is Admiral Kethmore." The fleet commander's voice echoed across the communication channels. "Assume standard engagement formation. Begin long-range bombardment on my mark." Morrison watched as the Coalition fleet arranged itself into complex 3-dimensional patterns. The largest ships formed the center of the formation, while smaller vessels took positions on the flanks and above. The Defiance, along with the other rearguard ships, hung back at maximum sensor range. "Mark," Admiral Kethmore announced. The space between the two fleets erupted in brilliant flashes of light. Plasma beams and particle cannons reached across millions of kilometers, their energy discharges lighting up space like a deadly fireworks display. The Coalition ships fired in coordinated volleys, their weapons creating geometric patterns of destruction aimed at the enemy formation. The Syndicate fleet responded with weapons Morrison had never seen before. Dark energy beams that seemed to bend space around them lanced toward the Coalition ships. When these beams struck, they didn't just damage armor and shields, they seemed to consume the very matter they touched, leaving perfectly spherical holes in the target vessels. "Their technology is incredible," Chief Engineer Patricia Wells said from her station. "Those dark matter cannons are punching right through Coalition shields like they aren't even there." Morrison studied the tactical display, watching the battle unfold. Both fleets were maneuvering in complex patterns, trying to gain positional advantage while avoiding the most devastating enemy weapons. Ships on both sides began taking damage, their shields flaring and failing under the intense bombardment. The battle raged for over an hour, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. The Coalition had more ships, but the Syndicate technology was clearly superior. Morrison watched in frustration as alien vessels on both sides were destroyed or crippled, knowing that his crew was sitting on the sidelines. Then something changed. A Syndicate battlecruiser broke through the Coalition line, its dark hull scarred but intact. The enemy ship was heading directly toward Admiral Kethmore's flagship, its weapons charging for what looked like a killing blow. Morrison made his decision without thinking. "Hayes, plot an intercept course for that battlecruiser. Maximum acceleration." "Sir," Hayes replied, "we don't have orders to engage." "We do now," Morrison said grimly. "Wells, bring all weapons online. Rodriguez, prepare nuclear warheads for close-range detonation." The Defiance leaped forward, its chemical thrusters pushing the ship to velocities that surprised both the Coalition and Syndicate fleets. Unlike the massive alien vessels that maneuvered like floating cities, the human ship moved like a fighter, small and fast and deadly. The Syndicate battlecruiser detected the approaching threat and turned its weapons toward the Defiance. Dark matter cannons fired, but the human ship was too small and too fast to target effectively at close range. Morrison had closed to point-blank range before the enemy could adjust their firing solutions. "Fire everything," Morrison ordered. Nuclear warheads detonated against the alien ship's shields while railgun rounds punched through armor that had never been designed to withstand solid projectiles. The kinetic penetrator rounds, traveling at incredible velocity, simply ignored the energy-based defenses and tore through the battlecruiser's hull like paper. The Syndicate ship came apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the entire battlefield. For a moment, both fleets stopped firing as everyone tried to understand what had just happened. Morrison looked at the tactical display and smiled. The aliens might have superior technology, but they had never encountered human tactics. The explosion of the Syndicate battlecruiser created a shockwave that rippled across both fleets. Jake Morrison watched as debris from the destroyed enemy ship scattered in all directions, some pieces large enough to damage nearby vessels. The Coalition ships closest to the explosion had to adjust their positions to avoid the expanding cloud of wreckage. Admiral Kethmore's voice crackled over the communication channel, his harmonic tones carrying obvious displeasure. "Captain Morrison, you were ordered to remain with the rear guard. Explain your actions immediately." Morrison keyed his response while watching the tactical display. The Syndicate fleet was regrouping after losing one of their heavy units, but they would resume the attack soon. "Admiral, the enemy ship was about to destroy your flagship. I took action to prevent that outcome. Your interference disrupted our battle formation," Admiral Kethmore replied coldly. "Return to your assigned position at once." Before Morrison could respond, another voice joined the channel. Captain Zeth Cole of the Zerian cruiser Starfire spoke up. "Admiral, perhaps we should examine how the human vessel achieved such an effective result. Our weapons barely scratched that battlecruiser's armor." Morrison smiled slightly. At least one alien officer was thinking tactically, rather than just following protocol. "Captain Zeth Cole, I'm transmitting our sensor data from the engagement. Our kinetic weapons seem to be more effective against Syndicate hulls than energy-based attacks." The battle resumed before Admiral Kethmore could order Morrison back to the rear guard. The Syndicate fleet had finished regrouping and was advancing in a new formation designed to concentrate their firepower on the Coalition's largest ships. Dark matter cannons began firing again, their purple beams reaching across space to punch holes in Coalition vessels. Morrison studied the enemy attack patterns while his crew analyzed the data from their successful engagement. Chief Engineer Patricia Wells worked at her station, running calculations on the armor composition of the destroyed battlecruiser. "Captain," Wells reported, "I think I understand why our weapons were so effective. The Syndicate ships use adaptive armor that adjusts to counter energy attacks. When a plasma beam hits their hull, the armor changes its molecular structure to absorb or deflect that specific type of energy." Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hayes looked up from his console. "But kinetic weapons don't use energy. They just hit things really hard." "Exactly," Wells continued. "Their armor can't adapt to solid projectiles traveling at high velocity. It's like trying to stop a bullet with a mirror. The adaptive properties don't help against pure kinetic force." Morrison absorbed this information while watching the battle unfold. The Coalition fleet was holding its own, but barely. Ships on both sides continued to trade devastating volleys, and the casualty count was climbing on both sides. If the pattern continued, the battle would end in a costly stalemate. "Hayes," Morrison said, "open a direct channel to Captain Zeth Cole. I want to share our tactical analysis with him." The Zerian captain's crystal face appeared on the main screen, his blue internal light pulsing with what Morrison had learned indicated concentration. "Captain Morrison, your data is most interesting. Are you suggesting that kinetic attacks are superior to our energy weapons?" "Not superior," Morrison replied, "but effective in ways the Syndicate doesn't expect. Their defenses are built around countering energy attacks because that's what every other species in the galaxy uses. They've never had to deal with old-fashioned projectile weapons." Captain Zeth Cole's light shifted to a brighter blue. "Fascinating. But our ships are not equipped with kinetic weapons. We abandoned such primitive technology centuries ago." Morrison grinned. Captain, you don't need kinetic weapons if you can create kinetic effects. Your plasma cannons generate incredible amounts of energy. What if instead of trying to overwhelm their adaptive armor, you use that energy to accelerate solid projectiles? There was a pause while Captain Zethkol considered this. You suggest using our energy weapons to launch physical ammunition, rather than firing energy directly at the target. Exactly, Morrison said. Turn your plasma cannons into railguns. Use the energy to accelerate chunks of metal or asteroid debris. The Syndicate armor won't be able to adapt to something that simple. Captain Zethkol's internal light began pulsing rapidly, indicating excitement. This could work. Our weapons have more than enough power to accelerate solid projectiles to devastating velocities. While the two captains discussed tactics, the battle continued around them. Morrison noticed that several other coalition ships had moved closer to listen in on their conversation. Word was spreading through the fleet that the human captain had found a weakness in Syndicate defenses. Commander Velshan of the aquatic Kepler cruiser Deep Current joined the discussion. Captain Morrison, my ship carries mining charges for asteroid operations. Could these be modified into kinetic projectiles? Absolutely, Morrison replied. Any solid object can become a weapon if you accelerate it fast enough. The key is hitting the Syndicate ships before their adaptive systems can compensate. Admiral Kethmore's voice cut across their planning session. All vessels, the enemy is preparing for another assault. Maintain defensive formation and prepare for standard energy weapon engagement. Morrison looked at Captain Zethkol on his screen. The Zerian officer's crystal form was now glowing with determination. Captain Morrison, I believe it is time to test your theory. Will you assist in a coordinated attack? Gladly, Morrison replied. But we'll need to move fast. The Syndicate will adapt once they see what we're doing. Morrison contacted the other coalition captains who had been listening to their conversation. Within minutes, he had assembled an unofficial squadron of 12 ships willing to try the new tactics. Admiral Kethmore was too busy coordinating the main fleet defense to notice this smaller group forming up. The Syndicate attack came as expected, with their heaviest ships leading the charge. Dark matter cannons fired in coordinated volleys, trying to punch through the coalition defensive line. Several coalition vessels took heavy damage, their shields failing under the sustained bombardment. Morrison's improvised squadron moved into action. The Defiance led the charge, its nuclear missiles and railgun rounds targeting a Syndicate heavy cruiser. Behind the human ship, Captain Zethkol's Starfire used its plasma cannons to accelerate chunks of asteroid debris to incredible velocities. The results were immediate and dramatic. The Syndicate heavy cruiser's adaptive armor began adjusting to counter the expected energy attacks, but the kinetic projectiles simply punched through the modified hull sections like they weren't there. The enemy ship lost main power and began drifting helplessly. Commander Velshan's Deep Current scored the next kill, using modified mining charges accelerated by magnetic launchers to destroy a Syndicate destroyer. The explosive charges penetrated the enemy hull before detonating, causing catastrophic internal damage that no amount of adaptive armor could prevent. Across the improvised squadron, similar successes were being achieved. Ships that had been struggling to damage, Syndicate vessels with energy weapons were now scoring devastating hits with improvised kinetic attacks. The enemy formation began to waver as ship after ship fell to the unexpected assault. Morrison watched the tactical display with satisfaction, as red enemy markers winked out one by one. Admiral Kethmore's voice echoed across the fleet communication channels, his harmonic tones now carrying notes of amazement rather than displeasure. All ships implement kinetic assault protocols immediately. Repeat, all ships convert to kinetic attack patterns. Morrison smiled as he watched the entire coalition fleet begin adapting human tactics. The tide of battle was finally turning. The victory at Sigma Draconis spread through coalition space like wildfire. Within days, every military commander in the galaxy had heard about the human tactics that had broken the Syndicate defensive advantage. Jake Morrison found himself called to strategy meetings with species he had never heard of, all wanting to understand how kinetic weapons could change the course of the war. But the Void Syndicate was not sitting idle. Intelligence reports began arriving at coalition headquarters showing massive enemy fleet movements. The Syndicate had pulled back their forward elements and was consolidating their forces around their primary strongholds. More concerning were the technical analysis reports that suggested the enemy was already working on countermeasures. Morrison sat in the briefing room aboard Admiral Kethmore's flagship, studying holographic displays of captured Syndicate technology. The enemy ships they had destroyed in recent battles showed clear modifications to their hull designs. The adaptive armor was being reinforced with additional layers of conventional metal plating. They learn quickly, Admiral Kethmore observed, his crystal form pulsing with concerned blue light. Our kinetic advantage may be temporary. Chief Engineer Patricia Wells had been working around the clock with Coalition scientists, analyzing every piece of Syndicate wreckage they could recover. She stood before the assembled officers looking tired but determined. The good news is that we understand their technology better now, Wells began. The Syndicate ships use exotic matter power cores that generate incredible amounts of energy. The bad news is that these power cores are extremely sensitive to specific types of electromagnetic interference. Morrison leaned forward in his chair. What kind of interference? Wells activated a holographic display showing the internal structure of a Syndicate power core. Their exotic matter becomes unstable when exposed to certain radio frequencies. The problem is getting those frequencies inside their ships past all their shielding. Captain Zeth Cole's harmonic voice resonated through the briefing room. Captain Morrison, you have proven skilled at finding unconventional solutions. Do you have any suggestions? Morrison studied the technical data while his mind raced through possibilities. The Syndicate ships were heavily shielded against energy attacks, but their hulls could be penetrated by kinetic weapons. If they could combine both approaches somehow. What if we put radio transmitters inside our kinetic projectiles? Morrison asked. We punch through their hull with solid rounds, then broadcast the disruption frequencies directly into their ship from the inside. Wells nodded enthusiastically. That could work. We'd need to design transmitters that could survive the impact and acceleration forces, but it's definitely possible. Admiral Kethmore's light shifted to a brighter shade of blue. How long would it take to develop such weapons? Give me 48 hours, Wells replied. I'll need to work with the Coalition engineering teams, but we can modify existing ammunition to carry the transmitters. The next 2 days were a blur of frantic activity. Morrison barely left the engineering sections as teams of human and alien technicians worked together to create the new ammunition. They called them screamer rounds because of the high-pitched radio signals they would broadcast inside enemy ships. The first test came sooner than expected. Long-range sensors detected a massive Syndicate fleet approaching the Vega system, where the Coalition had established their primary staging area. Over 1,500 enemy ships were moving in perfect formation, their dark hulls blocking out stars as they advanced. Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the tactical display as the enemy fleet took up positions on the edge of the system. This wasn't just another raiding force. This was the main Syndicate battle fleet, come to end the war once and for all. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hayes reported from his station. Coalition fleet strength is 830 ships. We're outnumbered almost 2 to 1. Morrison nodded grimly. The math was simple and unforgiving. Even with their new tactics, facing that many enemy ships would be a challenge. But Admiral Kethmore had a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Instead of meeting the Syndicate fleet in traditional formation, the Coalition forces would break into small, fast-moving groups. Each group would target specific enemy vessels using hit-and-run tactics, rather than engaging in prolonged battles. It was a strategy based entirely on human military thinking, adapted for space combat. Morrison found himself in command of Task Group 7, consisting of the Defiance and 11 Coalition vessels. Their target was a cluster of Syndicate heavy cruisers positioned on the enemy fleet's left flank. If they could disable those ships quickly, it would create a gap in the Syndicate formation that other Coalition groups could exploit. The battle began at maximum range, with both fleets exchanging long-distance fire. Plasma beams and dark matter cannons lit up space as the opposing forces tested each other's defenses. Morrison watched the displays, waiting for the right moment to begin his attack run. All ships, this is Morrison, he announced on the task group frequency. Execute attack pattern Delta on my mark. Remember, hit hard and get out fast. Don't try to finish damaged ships. Leave that for the follow-up groups. Morrison waited until the main fleets were fully engaged, their attention focused on the massive energy weapon exchanges happening at the center of the battle. Then he gave the signal. Mark. Task Group 7 accelerated hard, using the debris and energy discharges from the main battle as cover. They approached the Syndicate heavy cruisers from an unexpected angle, coming in low relative to the plane of battle where enemy sensors would have difficulty tracking them. The first Syndicate ship they encountered was a kilometer-long battle cruiser with weapons capable of destroying entire cities. Morrison's group hit it with everything they had. Nuclear warheads detonated against its shields while screamer rounds punched through the hull and began broadcasting disruption frequencies. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The battlecruiser's exotic matter power core became unstable as the radio signals interfered with its containment systems. Internal explosions began tearing the ship apart from the inside, starting small but growing larger as secondary systems failed. Commander Helen Torres, leading the coalition destroyer Swift Strike, scored the next kill. Her ship's modified plasma cannons accelerated screamer rounds to incredible velocities, punching clean through a Syndicate heavy cruiser's armor. The enemy vessel lost power within seconds, drifting helplessly as its exotic matter core shut down to prevent a catastrophic explosion. Across the battlefield, similar attacks were taking place. The Syndicate fleet, built around the assumption that they would face traditional energy weapon attacks, found themselves overwhelmed by tactics they had never encountered. Ships that had seemed invincible just days earlier were falling to relatively small coalition attack groups, but the enemy was already adapting. Morrison watched on his tactical display as Syndicate ships began changing their formations, spreading out to reduce the effectiveness of concentrated attacks. Some enemy vessels were even jettisoning their exotic matter cores and switching to backup power systems that were less vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the conflict began, the coalition was winning. The Void Syndicate fortress system was death itself made manifest in space. Jake Morrison stared at the tactical display aboard the coalition flagship, trying to comprehend the scale of the defenses they faced. 17 planets had been converted into massive weapon platforms, their surfaces covered with continent-sized gun emplacements that could destroy entire fleets. Artificial moons orbited each world, generating overlapping shield barriers that created an impenetrable defensive shell. Admiral Kethmore's crystal form pulsed with deep purple light, indicating extreme concern. Our intelligence estimates suggest that a direct assault would require at least 3,000 ships to have any chance of success. We have barely 800 vessels remaining after the recent battles. The other coalition commanders studied the fortress system data with obvious dismay. Captain Zethkol spoke for all of them when he said, "The Syndicate has had decades to build these defenses. Every approach vector is covered by multiple weapon platforms. Any ship that enters the system will be destroyed within minutes." Morrison examined the sensor readings more carefully, looking for something the others had missed. The massive defensive platforms were indeed formidable, but their very size might be creating weaknesses that conventional military thinking couldn't exploit. "Admiral," Morrison said, "what if we don't try to fight through the defenses? What if we go around them instead?" The alien officers turned to look at him with expressions ranging from confusion to skepticism. Admiral Kethmore's harmonic voice carried a note of impatience. "Captain Morrison, the fortress system covers all possible approach routes. There is no way to go around defenses that extend throughout the entire star system." Morrison stood and moved to the holographic display, pointing at the gravitational sensor readings. "Look at these gravity distortions. The fortress platforms are so massive they're actually warping space-time around them. Those distortions create gravitational currents that could be used for navigation." Chief Engineer Patricia Wells leaned forward, her eyes bright with understanding. "Captain, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "A slingshot maneuver," Morrison confirmed. "We accelerate the Defiance to near light speed and use the fortress system's own gravity wells to whip us through their defenses faster than their targeting systems can track." The silence in the briefing room was deafening. Finally, Commander Velshan of the aquatic species spoke up. "Captain Morrison, such velocities would be lethal to any organic crew. The acceleration forces alone would kill everyone aboard your ship." Morrison nodded grimly. "That's why we'll need to modify the ship's inertial dampeners and put the crew in acceleration couches designed for extreme G-forces. It won't be comfortable, but it's survivable for short periods." Admiral Kethmore's light shifted to a deep red, indicating strong disapproval. Captain, you are proposing suicide. Even if your crew survives the acceleration, you will have perhaps 20 seconds inside the fortress system before momentum carries you past the targets. 20 seconds is not enough time to mount an effective attack. It is if we deploy everything at once, Morrison replied. We strip the Defiance down to essential systems only, load every weapon we have, and fire everything in a single coordinated strike. Nuclear warheads, kinetic penetrators, screamer rounds, and one more surprise I've been working on with the engineering teams. Wells stood up, her face showing a mixture of excitement and terror. Captain, you can't be serious about the quantum device. Morrison smiled grimly. The quantum resonance device is our trump card. We've reverse-engineered enough syndicate technology to build one of our own. If we can get it close enough to their central command platform, it will create a cascading failure that brings down their entire defensive network. The quantum device was the result of weeks of work by human and coalition scientists. By studying captured syndicate equipment, they had learned how to create artificial quantum entanglement fields that could disrupt exotic matter on a massive scale. The device was essentially a quantum bomb that would cause every syndicate power core in the system to become unstable. Simultaneously, Admiral Kethmore studied the technical specifications for several minutes before speaking. Captain Morrison, this plan is beyond reckless. You are asking us to stake the entire war on a single ship, making an impossible run through the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. Admiral, Morrison replied, this war started with Earth sending one ship to join your fleet. Everyone thought that wasn't enough, but we've proven that sometimes one ship can make all the difference. The Syndicate expects us to attack with overwhelming force because that's how every other species fights. They've never had to defend against a single ship moving at near light speed. The debate continued for hours, but Morrison could see that he was winning. The coalition commanders were desperate, and desperate people were willing to consider desperate plans. The fortress system was impregnable by conventional means, which meant unconventional tactics were their only hope. The final decision came down to a vote. By a narrow margin, the coalition command authorized Morrison's plan. The Defiance would make the attack run while the rest of the fleet created a diversion at the edge of the system. The next 3 days were spent preparing for what everyone knew might be a suicide mission. Wells and her engineering teams worked around the clock to modify the ship's systems. Every non-essential component was removed to reduce mass. The crew quarters were stripped out and replaced with acceleration couches that could keep a human alive at 20 G-forces. Morrison addressed his crew one final time before the mission began. 120 men and women stood in the ship's main corridor, looking nervous but determined. Many of them had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not survive it. I won't lie to you, Morrison said. What we're about to attempt has never been tried before. We're going to accelerate this ship to speeds that will test every system we have. The G-forces will push your bodies to their absolute limits. And if we succeed, we'll be making the most dangerous weapons run in military history. He paused, looking at the faces of people who had become more than crew members over the months of fighting. They had become family. But if we succeed, we end this war. No more coalition worlds will fall to the Syndicate. No more innocent people will die because we didn't have the courage to take a calculated risk. Earth sent one ship to this war, and that ship is going to finish it. The attack began exactly as planned. The coalition fleet jumped to the edge of the fortress system and began a massive diversionary assault. Energy weapons lit up space as 800 ships engaged the outer defensive platforms, drawing attention away from the real threat. Morrison watched the velocity readings climb as the Defiance began its acceleration run. The ship groaned under the stress of forces it was never designed to handle. At 50% of light speed, the inertial dampeners began to fail. At 70%, several crew members lost consciousness despite the protective couches. At 97% of light speed, the Defiance entered the fortress system. Morrison had 17 seconds of consciousness left before the acceleration forces would knock him out completely. His crew had trained for this moment, knowing they would have to execute the entire attack plan while barely conscious. Automated systems deployed every weapon the ship carried. Nuclear warheads spread out in a pattern, calculated to hit multiple fortress platforms. Kinetic penetrators targeted power distribution nodes. Screamer rounds aimed for communication arrays. And at the center of it all, the quantum resonance device armed itself and locked onto the central command platform. Morrison watched the device deploy as his vision began to fade. The last thing he saw was a brilliant flash of light as the quantum field destabilized every exotic matter power core in the system. When he woke up 6 hours later, the war was over.